but you have staff that are managing it. You have product that are expiring on the shelf. You have recalled product that could potentially be used if it's not being managed. So Movemedical came up with our first entry to the market, Consignment Inventory Manager, to automate and really allow everybody to see what's going on with consignment inventory at the hospital and potentially crowdsource activities from the staff and move them over to the supplier rep who's actually doing the activity, probably duplicating effort.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this vendor spotlight, I am going to be speaking with Keerthi Kanubaddi, Executive Vice President of Health System Partnerships, and Neal Ferguson, VP of Client Engagement with Movemedical. Movemedical is a company you may not have heard about if you're working on the front lines in healthcare, but they are a very familiar company to the supplier community, and now they are bringing their solution to healthcare to try to break down some of the barriers and silos between the data systems, specifically ERP of the hospital and the supplier, so that they can create some efficiencies and really transform healthcare. I know we're all looking for those efficiencies today. So stay with us. We've got a great conversation with Keerthi and Neal coming up next.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
I have the pleasure now of speaking with Keerthi Kanubaddi, Executive Vice President of Health System Partnerships, and Neal Ferguson, VP of Client Engagement with Movemedical. And we are going to be talking today about a solution that can create synergy and transparency between health systems ERP and their supplier data. And this in all an effort to create much needed efficiencies. We'll be talking about consignment management, but really the picture we're going to paint today is much bigger than that. Gentlemen, very, very happy and excited to talk to you today about Movemedical. And I would say for a lot of our listening audience and our viewers on the Power Supply brand as well as Beyond Clean, they may not have heard of you. And so I'm excited to introduce you and let them know that you are not as new as they may think. As a matter of fact, you've done some pretty innovative things over the years. I'm going to start with you, Neal. I want to welcome you to the podcast. Maybe you can introduce yourself, talk about your background and how you find yourself with Movemedical today.
Yeah, so I've worked in med device for nearly 10 years now. I've been working in supply chain, IT, customer service, in a broad array of different parts of the value chain, and joined Movemedical because I saw a need for greater client engagement. And having been on the other side, working with them for years, I was excited to be able to work with a variety of their different clients to be able to create industry standards around field inventory and ultimately create that partnership with hospitals that we're lacking right now, especially here in the US.
Yeah, I'm excited. And everybody who's listening, stay tuned because we're going to be really having Neal tell his story as a client of Movemedical as we get towards the end of the discussion today. So I love always hearing from people that have, experienced the service. And I think that's going to be really insightful for people. Keerthi, you're not unfamiliar to our audiences on Power Supply and Beyond Clean. You've been a podcast guest on both previously, educational episodes and vendor spotlights highlighting, maybe some prior work that you've done in the industry. So you may need less of an introduction, and yet I'm going to have you do it anyway. If you could tell everybody, what you've been up to in healthcare over so many years, and then now with your new role at Movemedical.
Justin, first of all, it's great to see you again. We really love interacting with your team, and it's a real opportunity and pleasure to be here today. I don't want to presume that a lot of people know what I did in the past, but I definitely am familiar with your audience, and I feel like a lot of thought leaders listen to this podcast. So again, it's our pleasure to be here. Both Neal and I are relatively new to the Movemedical organization, but we're part of this expansion that's really focused on growing our relationships, both on the supplier side, but more importantly with the providers. And that's really what we're talking about today. So Movemedical is an organization that is not new, but it might not be familiar to a lot of folks. And the reason for that is we've been really working behind the scenes for the last decade plus as a technology partner for some of the largest medical device companies in the world. Our founder, Bo Malosnik, actually spent time with field reps many years ago and really hand-built and created the platform that became Zimmer Biomet's first platform in the market. And now we have a number of enterprise customers that are using the latest version of the technology, which we term Movemedical. So we've been around for a while. Our platform is very mature. And one of the things that we've always known is that we wanted to get into the hospital market. And that's one of the reasons, again, why Neal and I have joined the organization most recently. We wanted to make this expansion and not just be focused on suppliers. So to that end, our goal is really not to just be a siloed solution. We want to work with the technology platforms that hospitals use today. We want to provide them more visibility to what's happening in their hospitals and what their suppliers are doing. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in healthcare if we can kind of break down the silos of how data and information is being shared, particularly from the supplier to the provider.
So much conversation, especially in the supply chain world, and over the last several years, probably more than ever, around transparency and really having also a very quick and nimble sort of conversation with the suppliers, because things all of a sudden can change very quickly. And I'm just not sure that all of the effective communication channels, or I should say there are effective communication channels. I'm just not sure they're as fast as the industry is demanding that they be in this environment that we find ourselves in now, especially with even contracts. They're looking at not having sole source agreements anymore. And this conversation around resiliency and transparency is it's paramount to the discussions that I'm having on the podcast all the time. And I'm sure that the two of you have seen that. And I know we're going to be talking about consignment management as, one way to paint this picture of what can be accomplished by creating synergies between, the supplier's data and the health system's enterprise resource planner programs, ERP. And I'm just wondering, what has been the frustrations that you've seen? We talk about consignment, and I think consigned and loan inventory, sterile processing listening now is going to be okay, I know the challenges in that area very, very, very well, but it doesn't necessarily tell the data story. So can you kind of tell everybody that's listening where the challenges are around that data interchange and how that can slow things down or create issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing that we see in the market today are a lot of bolt-on technology platforms that are very well-intentioned, really great platforms for loaner management, for bill-only automation, for tissue tracking, a variety of material management type systems. And we feel that, the transparency that's been lacking is that there is a manual aspect to these systems. And there's a normalization of data that maybe a field service rep is responsible for entering into a hospital system, or a sterile processing professional is responsible for taking a count sheet and translating it into their sterile processing system. So we're seeing all of these manual normalization efforts, which really don't need to exist, because at Movemedical, we know from our experience with all of these suppliers that there is great deal of detail and tracking at the enterprise resource planning level, the ERP level of the supplier. So we know what really is coming to a hospital. How is it supposed to be sterilized? What are the images of it? So can we make that information more readily accessible to supply chain personnel, to sterile processing personnel? That's really what we believe, and we'll do it with any system, but Movemedical is uniquely prepared to do that because we have a framework that any supplier can work with.
I feel like a lot of times, the inventory management aspects, especially like just visibility into consigned and loaned inventory, is a real challenge for a lot of the suppliers. And I feel like they've always wanted to have a better handle on that inventory. And then at the same time, when you're working on the front lines in the hospital, whether you're working on contracts and supply chain or you're dealing with the day-to-day of that inventory coming in and being used in a case and having to be reprocessed in sterile processing, I feel like they've got to track expired product. They need to have all of this information. And to your point about loading the count sheets, the consigned and loaned inventory is by far the most complex. Like, you can't just take somebody off the street and plug them into a sterile processing department and be like, okay, put this inventory together, which is why a lot of times the reps are doing it. But then the people who are responsible for making sure that the sets are reprocessed correctly have a little bit less control and a little bit less visibility to that. And I feel like getting that information in the right amount of time, just feel like there's, a lot of waste that might be existing there, Neal. Like, can you give us an idea, like, how much waste there really is in this process?
Yeah, so there's waste across loaners, trunk stock, consignment, a variety of different spaces that inventory is stored. And while we obviously don't have the numbers for everyone in the industry, I know I was recently at an industry conference where they shared that a large Fortune 500 med device supplier was wasting 30% of their field inventory, just letting it scrap out, be expired. And you know that in addition to that there's product that's on the shelf that's customer owned that Fortune 500 company is not eating the costs on, but that the hospitals are eating the costs on. So there's just massive amounts of waste across a variety of different channels. And I think we have a solution here that really speaks to that this needs to lower the cost for healthcare for everyone.
I'm also thinking about bill-only POs and just the amount of labor that goes into matching that up and making sure it's accurate and, looking at contracted pricing versus off-contract. Like, there's an enormous amount of effort, that manual effort, regardless of whatever assistance you get from your ERP or other technologies. There's just a lot of manual effort in that process. And we know that there's a shortage of staff in supply chain on the front lines today. So I feel like that's a huge opportunity. Have you explored bill-only POs? Is that kind of an area that you're able to help with as well?
Yeah, I think you bring up a natural extension of our products. And I do want to be clear that Movemedical, today, our entry into the market is really going to be focused on consignment inventory management. But we absolutely want to help make loaner management, bill-only management more seamless. And the way that you do that is you're able to essentially flow the appropriate data about incoming kits and what's being captured from a supplier's perspective for billing, and tying that to basically the item master of the hospital, flowing into the ERP of the hospital potentially, and creating a requisition and purchase order as a result of it. So you really can remove the paper from the process. And I think everybody that would listen to this podcast knows that bill only is almost a reverse purchasing process. You're getting the PO after you've purchased and implanted the product, or utilized the product, I should say. But we envision a future where you could almost preempt and get an on-demand PO in advance of the implantation of a product, because you have such clarity around what's been brought in and what's eventually going to get billed to the patient. So these types of things, I think, open up the doors for a lot of efficiencies where clinical staff members don't have to transcribe information. And that's something that we really saw as a real problem today, is the reason we chose consignment inventory management, we see a lot of staff members in hospitals who are doing work and it's not quantifiable. So it's very hard to understand how much it costs you to have a really robust consignment management program. It sounds great and it reduces your outlay, so to speak, but you have staff that are managing it. You have product that are expiring on the shelf. You have recalled product that could potentially be used if it's not being managed. So Movemedical came up with our first entry to the market, Consignment Inventory Manager, to automate and really allow everybody to see what's going on with consignment inventory at the hospital and potentially crowdsource activities from the staff and move them over to the supplier rep who's actually doing the activity, probably duplicating effort. And that's one of my challenges with the systems that are on the market today. There's a lot of duplication of effort.
I was just going to add there that this is something that we focused on the med device side as one of our key offerings, because there's just such a latency in when pending POs for consignment inventory is collected. Oftentimes in the industry, it can be months or even longer because there's that lack of transparency. And so in order for us to create better partnerships between hospitals and med device suppliers, the med device suppliers now have our technology. It's become an industry norm. But for the hospitals, we need that collaboration on both sides so that both sides can go be receiving the benefit.
You know, it would seem to me that a lot of these bolt-on technologies, as you kind of termed it, Keerthi, were designed around the hospital and then tried to reach out to the suppliers and figure out how they're going to get the data to come in and fit their system. What I think is really unique about the way Movemedical is doing it is you've already been working with the suppliers and their ERP. You understand their data, where it's housed, how it moves within their organization. So I feel like building that bridge to a hospital ERP is a lot easier when you understand the structure of the information that you're trying to pull in. Do you find that as, you know, kind of a fundamental difference between you and maybe some of the other opportunities or solutions that are out there?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, there's two pieces to that. Absolutely having access and the ability to consume ERP-level data from a supplier. It has taught us how suppliers can optimize field inventory management. So our technology is used in warehouses. It's used to manage trunk stock. It's used to capture usage in the OR with reps. So when you have that kind of awareness and visibility, it really allows you to track the assets a little more holistically. So I would say that for us, having the information coming from the supplier's ERP is the difference. And our first offering doesn't even require the hospital to integrate. It has a no IT, no ERP integration on the hospital side approach. Consignment Inventory Manager simply takes supplier ERP level data and visualizes it for a given hospital. So they can get started very quickly. And we really, as Neal had pointed out, have built the largest consortium of medical device suppliers in the market to use a single technology for field sales enablement for inventory management. So I believe that we're very well positioned to help hospitals in this regard because we've been doing this kind of work with suppliers for many years.
I've had a lot of conversations around interoperability. And I feel like fundamentally one of the challenges to interoperability is the protection of the data. And in a lot of cases, it's, well, we need you to use our proprietary software or something like that, which then makes it really hard for a health system to be interoperable because the consumption of the data is really built with bottlenecks inherent in the flow of information or safeguards. And that I feel like is a major challenge these days, because if you're really looking at a health system from a high level and trying to get end to end visibility to the supplies that are coming in, how they're utilized, what the rev cycle and reimbursement is like, to really do that, you've got to get good interoperability. And that kind of requires suppliers to play nice in the sandbox in a way, or service providers. I say supplier kind of loosely there because, you know, it could be a technology platform. It could be a service or a SaaS solution. What's your stance on sort of working with companies to help make sure that this information that you've done such a great job of curating on the supplier side remains sort of flowing through a provider's ERP? What's your company's kind of stance on interoperability?
Our CEO, Bo Malosnik, is not only our CEO, but the chief architect. And he's had kind of the vision that this should not be something that's, I know it sounds maybe cliche, but it's not just about making money. It is about creating greater transparency and unlocking efficiencies by working with the relevant entities. So that means we should be working with material management information systems, right? The sterile processing systems in the market. We should be working with the bill-only platforms if that's what a health system chooses to use, because we can supply relevant data and do it very efficiently as long as the health system is okay with that. So when the health system asks that we work with partners, we are absolutely willing and able to do that. And that is one of our design philosophies. It's a fundamental of our company, is that our data should not be siloed. It should be for the benefit of the hospital and then also the suppliers too. We want the suppliers to be able to highlight how resilient they are from a supply chain perspective, right? Some suppliers are really amazing, and many of them are, especially those that invest in a system like Movemedical. They do a lot of great work, and they can really highlight that to their health system customers.
And Neal, maybe you can speak to this a little bit as well, but what are some of the challenges with that, field inventory? I mean, I think myself, I've heard a lot of the stories. We just have no idea what we have out there. And, you kind of talked about, the waste or the lost, I should say, the loss of product that may come from that. But what's at the cause of that? Is it literally just the lack of connectedness on that information? Like, do suppliers not really get great utilization data because they're relying on billing data versus maybe inventory logistics?
Justin, I could go off about the different reasons that there's problems with field inventory for the rest of this podcast. There's so many different reasons, but I'll focus on one or two. One of the first things is you have different players in the customer space or in the hospital space that all have different incentives. So the doctor wants the thing that's the greatest, the newest, the thing that's going to make his job the easiest. Supply chain wants to keep costs down and keep the number of SKUs you're using down to a minimum. The clinical wants to make sure that his doctor is never upset, that there's always the product on hand that he needs. And so because of that, you have all sorts of different incentives of what should be on consignment and what shouldn't be on consignment, or what should be loaned out and what shouldn't be loaned out. Then on top of that, who's keeping track of all this inventory? You've got field inventory reps from the suppliers who are scanning it. You've got people from the hospital scanning it. Sometimes you have third parties. And so you just have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And if they're all using one system that they're all able to speak to, then you can have supply chain talking to the physician about what should be on the docket. You should be able to have the field inventory rep who's from a supplier able to know, here's exactly what's on consignment. Here's what got used recently. But right now, that's just not something that's being used, and that's what we're fixing.
Another thing that I've noticed is a trend in healthcare. And, obviously you're talking about connecting ERPs, and there's data and information exchange. And, we've heard about all of the security risks. And so now, like, IT sourcing, I feel like in some cases can be a 12-month process. Like, it can really take some time. And sometimes, it's like what we need is technology. And yet we've put in these processes in healthcare where you can't adopt technology very quickly because there's this back-end risk associated with it. And, I've definitely sold a SaaS solution into healthcare. And so I've seen some of those questionnaires. They'd be 500 to 1,000 questions. And that's just day one getting out the ground. And then also, depending on how it's implemented, like the health system may have to commit some resources to get the project off the ground. So even if you get through the security assessments and the IT questionnaires, then you're waiting on, able-bodied, staff from the hospital in IS or IT that can kind of help in, driving the project forward. So Keerthi, how do you guys approach that as a company to kind of break down maybe some of the barriers or obstacles, to technology adoption in that scenario?
Justin, I think that you bring up a point that I believe all technology platforms, people that are hoping to make change in healthcare really need to pay attention to, which is we cannot keep stacking more and more implementations and challenging IT projects on hospitals unless there is a demonstrable ROI, something that is really smacking the health system in the face, and there's no other choice but to pursue it. But what I would say is for Movemedical in particular, we believe that in order to deliver value, you have to deliver it quickly, and you have to have two approaches. One that is not integrated and doesn't require the hospital's IT resources, and that's where consignment inventory management comes in. And then our next level capabilities can be implemented over time as the health system sees ROI from our initial offering that does not require integration or IT resources from the hospital. So it's a very deliberate strategy to deliver value before we start asking the hospital to engage us further. And you know what? Some hospitals will find that Consignment Inventory Manager is just doing a great job for them and they don't need to do anything else, right? They might have decided to go with solutions in other ways, but what we would like to see is that we are not only kind of breaking down those silos, but making it easier for them to implement a technology, see ROI, and then make the decision if they want to work with us further.
Yeah, building a reputation can be a major obstacle. I like how you're removing that barrier to entry anyway. No IT resources required, to utilize the consignment management system. That's, and how does is the cost borne by the hospital? Like, what's the model for that? Do they have to open up a certain amount of budget, or how does that work?
So our real focus here was that this system and this capability in particular needs to be something that can be acquired by large health systems, small health systems, surgery centers, anyone. So pricing is really kind of designed in that way. And, our business for the greater part of the last decade has been with suppliers and optimizing supplier operations. And we have a very good business in that way. So we believe that health systems obviously need to have skin in the game, but we also believe that the suppliers need to be a part of this solution as well. So we feel as if we're bringing forth the most equitable option where both the supplier and the provider have a little bit in. But I would say that we are very deliberate about making sure the provider does not have to have a budget-breaking implementation to get started.
Along those lines, I think that part of the reason why this problem hasn't been solved in the past is that there's been this pointing of, well, that person should pay for us to solve the solution. And I think that the best way to do it is that there's a little bit of skin in the game, but not a massive amount that's spread across a variety of the different parties in this problem. That way, everyone's bought in, everyone's going to be a part of the solution. And at the same time, it's solved for everyone. It's not solved for one primary player.
Yeah, I like that. It's
Great
a shared cost from all the different invested stakeholders in what can be gained from the collaboration, the partnership, the transparency, the leveraging of data and making it talk. I really, really like that approach. Another thing that you said, Keerthi, that I think is really important is like surgery centers, because we're seeing a lot more of these procedures moving out, into those settings versus being done in the main hospital. And some of those centers are for profit, and, you can see financial challenges, just in terms of, a for-profit model is very different in terms of how they get funding and how they look at operations versus a nonprofit or not-for-profit. And there's lots of great reasons to be moving these procedures, into that surgery center environment. But again, cost can be a real deterrent in that setting. And I can see the inventory also. A lot of times the inventory is getting shared from one surgery center to another. Like you're not, the consignment obviously is living there, but some of the loaners or, all of a sudden when there's add-ons for cases, then all of a sudden, there's a little bit of juggling of that inventory. When that starts moving around, I think things get pretty messy. So, I feel like that's an area that can really benefit from a solution like this. And knowing that you've, lowered that barrier to entry to something that even that environment can handle is, I think, a really important go-to-market strategy.
I think ultimately it is that we have to follow what the market is telling us. And I think we have to kind of come arm in arm with other critical capabilities. For example, there are outsourced or offsite sterilization capabilities that will be really important as surgery centers become more of a norm and are doing more procedures that are traditionally in hospitals. So, I think it is, again, incumbent upon all of us to figure out how we share the data for the benefit of the patient, really, and the surgery care site where they're having this procedure, whether it's in the surgery center or a community hospital or a university hospital.
All right. I think it's time we kind of get into Neal's story. And I would just love to hear from you, Neal, as a former client or customer of Movemedical. What was that like? What was your role? What were you responsible for? Maybe start there as you tell your story.
Yeah, so initially I was working in field inventory, trying to figure out how we solve this consignment issue. And similar to what Keerthi brought up with Bo Malosnik, our CEO, I was going along with ride-alongs with reps, seeing scanning done in the hospital, seeing why there was delays and POs, etc., and recognized there needs to be a better solution for this, and especially around audits and being able to keep track of inventory. And so I started looking around the market. We had a custom tool at the time and started asking, all right, well, what's out there? And I even talked to one of Move's competitors and explained to him, here's what we're trying to do. And their exact words were, you should be talking to Movemedical about this. So when your competitors are recommending you, you found a good solution. With that in mind, we went forward and said, okay, let's come up with a collaborative solution that can not just fix audits, but also work on inventory transfers, work on ordering inventory. And then for that client at the time, it was a major transition working towards bill and replace solutions. And so we were able to partner with them on being able to come up with a solution where they're able to manage their inventory more effectively and be able to better understand where things are at all times in a way that ultimately is transforming their industry and becoming industry leaders there. So that led me to go and say, well, if your competitors are recommending you, then you should probably go and join that company over anybody else. And I jumped over and said, hey, let's engage with the rest of our clients and be able to develop that industry standard around consignment, around trunk stock, and ultimately create those partnerships with hospitals and suppliers so that we solve this issue, that it doesn't have to be here in another 5-10 years, that we can finally have this done and over with.
Yeah. And I can imagine it also allows, the sales representatives to spend their time doing, more critical activities to support the hospital as well. Running around managing inventory, it can be a huge distraction, for a rep who is trying to get to the next case and be on time.
You have no idea. We've done tests and done surveys around this with different clients, and it varies from client to client, but we've saved for some clients a half day a week for their reps, because I'm telling you, we had reps who are, it's industry standard before they implement Move to have a piece of paper, write out the item number, look it up in another system, they'll log in the pricing, then put that all on, take a picture of that, send it off in an email to someone in field inventory or customer service who then inputs it into an ERP. Well, then there's something missing. The inventory wasn't where it was supposed to be. So then they're emailing back and forth. The rep forgot what he was talking about from 6 hours ago when he sent that email. So it just goes into some pending area, purgatory effectively for inventory. And it just is a convoluted system for the rep, convoluted system for internal teams, not how things should work. And so we've already solved it in the one space. I think we can solve it pretty easily in the other.
I want to ask you, I've got a note here, and I haven't seen it myself, but there's an ERP task time study. Is that something that you developed when you were a client or since then? Like, can you tell me about that? We're getting close to the end here. I can't believe it, but can you tell me about the task time study?
Yeah, what I can go and say is that there's a variety of our clients who are spending a lot of time in the ERP. So like I said, you're having this manual paper that you're now sending off to someone to input it into an ERP. Whereas now, using Move, they're scanning the inventory in, so no paperwork whatsoever. And that's being sent directly from their iPhone or their Android, whatever they're using, directly to the ERP. You've entirely skipped that back office channel. And so that allows for reallocation of those internal teams towards more value-add activities. How do we actually optimize inventory as a supplier versus just saying, okay, we let them go, they're doing their own thing now. No, like you need people who are dedicated to figuring out how we make sure that inventory is being used properly to make sure that doctors have the devices they need on hand when the patient walks in the door.
All right. Well, we spent a lot of time talking about, consignment inventory and the management system that you've developed, but there's a whole lot more to this. And Keerthi, I'm wondering if you can kind of paint a picture of the future, because nobody's really synergizing this data, right? Like you're going to go and really revolutionize, how health systems and suppliers work together by getting that data flowing nice and smooth versus going through a gatekeeper and people trying to translate the data or, the paper processes that help facilitate that. But there's a lot more than just managing consignment inventory at play here for how this can transform how healthcare is delivered.
You're absolutely right. I think that for us, it really is a much larger picture. Consignment, again, was chosen as an entry point for health systems because of our ability to deliver a very measurable win quickly without IT resources from the hospital. But it should not be missed that we can start to help, all of the other systems that are documenting what's used in a case. So we're talking about the EMR, the ERP on the hospital side. We could affect the sterile processing system, tissue tracking system, bill-only systems. So our vision for the future is really almost a clearinghouse of supplier and provider data where when both entities have agreed contractually that they can work together, the data can start to flow very seamlessly. And through that, we'll be able to unlock many, many efficiencies. We'll be able to determine what needs to be pulled from shelves. We can apply so many of the lessons. And that's what I love about listening to Neal tell me, his experience before coming here is that there are so many lessons we've picked up from our relationships with suppliers and optimization and forward stocking locations for suppliers that can be applied directly to to implant closets, to loaner rooms, to all of the inventory that the suppliers put on site at a hospital or support cases with.
And what I would add there is that's one of the things I really appreciate about working for Move is there's so many other software companies where they're trying to solve a problem because they saw a need in the market. But the unique thing for Move is myself, Bo, many of our other team members on the leadership team have rode along with sales reps in these engagements. They understand what the business actually is like, or they've been in the business. They've actually been the sales rep trying to collect that PO. Yeah. On that piece of paper. Keerthi is a great example of that.
Yeah.
We know how difficult this is. We're not coming in just solving the problem because we recognize there was a problem there. We lived it.
Yeah. And it's not something you simply solve on the supplier side. Like that may be the first step, but it's got to be solved on both sides. And I think, that's one of the reasons why this is an important conversation, even for our sterile processing audience, is just think about how much more streamlined this can all be. Like a lot of times there's a policy that the sets are going to be coming in at least 3 days ahead of time, and at least the IFU. And, I think a lot of times the reason that happens is because there is a lack of awareness on the inventory. But even then, when there isn't necessarily lack of awareness on the inventory or for the rep or even for the company on the supplier side, sometimes there's just a lack of transparency about what is coming in on the hospital side, and being able to communicate on that and tie it into scheduling and all of that, really can, I think, help automate communication really, and just help make sure that people can be a little bit more proactive in planning out their weeks. We do have a promotion. First 5 health systems to engage as a beta site will receive discounted pricing and a seat on your advisory board. So I do want to encourage everybody. Keerthi, how would they reach out and get more information about potentially being a beta site?
So there will be a link that can be followed from this podcast, and we will also make sure that you can go to movemedical.com and find out what we have to offer and request a demo there as well.
All right, gentlemen.
And of course, I'm always available, so you can reach out to me too anytime. LinkedIn.
I was going to say, I always plug, find Keerthi Kanubaddi and Neal Ferguson on LinkedIn, connect with them. Definitely start a conversation, follow Movemedical. And again, I think this is a really great opportunity to, especially for those early adopters out there, those visionaries that really want to do something transformative, to kind of hop on and shape the direction of how this works. And so again, first 5 health systems to engage as beta sites, discounted pricing, and an advisory board seat. You can help really lead this vision forward. Gentlemen, we're at the end, but I do want to give each of you, an opportunity to add anything that maybe we missed during the conversation, or just say a few closing thoughts. So Neal, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for us to solve this problem in the industry. This is just a space that there's too much waste going on right now, and too many people who are trying to manage a process that just simply doesn't work. We know how to solve it, so let's partner together and let's make it happen.
And Keerthi, any final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just wanted to reiterate that the consignment inventory management tool really is about giving health systems greater visibility, and also their suppliers greater visibility to what's on the shelf at a hospital, how it's being allocated, how it's being used, what needs to be moved, when it needs to be moved, and doing it in a way that can be implemented quickly for a real measurable win in 2024.
That was Neal Ferguson, VP of Client Engagement, and Keerthi Kanubaddi, Executive Vice President of Health System Partnerships with Movemedical. They've been around for over a decade, and they have been supporting medical device manufacturers and now bringing that forward. We talked a lot about the consignment management system, but there's a whole lot more, and I think Keerthi did a great job of painting that vision for the future. But if you want to help create that vision, they're just getting started in healthcare, even though they have this established presence with the supplier community. And the first 5 health systems to engage as beta sites will receive discounted pricing and a seat on their advisory board. So definitely go to movemedical.com, follow them on LinkedIn or Facebook, and definitely reach out and connect with Keerthi and Neal on LinkedIn as well, and take them up on this opportunity to really shape and transform healthcare, break down those barriers, and create that transparency. So that's going to do it for this vendor spotlight on Power Supply and Beyond Clean.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.